Can you imagine being in an experiment where you are the lab rat or the guinea pig? Hey guys, it's Ivan, and I wanted to talk to you about GMOs or genetically modified organisms. Now, genetically modified organisms were introduced back in the 80s, and they have become very, very popular, and they are widely used among, all kinds of different kinds of foods. And a lot of you have seen my GMO song or have watched the video as well. But I felt like 3 minutes were just not enough to go over certain things about GMOs. So I wanted to talk specifically about 4 myths surrounding GMOs and 3 tips also on how to avoid them. Now let's get into it. The first myth you'll hear chemical companies say is that GMOs are here to solve the world, the world crisis on food, or the food crisis that comes from, overpopulation and world hunger and all this stuff. Now, first, keep in mind that these are not altruistic companies. These are companies that came from Second World War, most of them, and they developed very, very toxic chemicals like DDT, Agent Orange, aspartame, etc. And quickly they realized that they needed to get into a different line of business, and so they got into food. And now they produce food. But these are the type of companies that we're dealing with here. And when they say that they're going to solve the world hunger, they have been around for a few decades, and world hunger has actually increased significantly, and it is due to the fact that there is more inequality around the world. So the problem with food crisis is not that there's not enough food. I've never gone to the supermarket and where there's no lettuce, or there's no kale, or there's no eggs, or whatever. Those kinds of problems, you don't find them in the first world countries. And the problem is that a lot of people do not have the resources or the money to purchase those products. That's the real problem, the inequality. So if these companies really wanted to solve that problem, they would have taught those people how to farm, how to generate their own crops, and how to be self-sufficient. So this is not the purpose of these companies, of course. And which brings me to the second myth. The second myth is that GMOs actually have higher yields. In other words, they can produce more with the same amount of agricultural land. So in other words, a GMO crop is supposed to deliver more corn, for example, than a conventional corn or than an organic corn. Now, nothing can be further from the truth here. There are several studies now showing that GMO crops and conventionals and organics do not have higher yield from each other. In fact, there are some circumstances where organics seem to do better than the other two, specifically like when there's drought or on certain conditions. So GMOs do not have higher yields than their counterparts. Now, the third myth that you'll find is that GMOs help reduce the amount of pesticides that farmers need. And in this case, we all know that pesticide use has become a really, really big problem. We now actually have superbugs who are resistant to these pesticides because we have just really, really overdone the pesticides. So what has happened is that crops that have pesticides in them, like the BT corn, now require additional pesticides because the bugs are now resistant to the BT corn. And on top of that, the production of pesticides and the use of pesticides has really quadrupled around the world. So GMOs have done nothing to improve the pesticide use. In fact, it's the opposite seems to be true. Now, the fourth myth that you'll hear chemical companies say is that GMOs are equivalent to their natural counterparts. And let me tell you, wow, this is really convenient for them because they actually have patents. They actually profit from the patents. So the seeds are significantly different so different that they require a patent that they can exploit and they can, make money from. But when it comes to consumption, that's us. When we're going to consume a product, they feel like we shouldn't know. We don't need to know. It would be more, confusing for the consumer to know which crops are GMOs and which crops are not, and which products have genetically modified organisms inside of them. So they feel like you shouldn't know, and they have done all kinds of efforts in order to keep you in the dark. So those are the 4 myths that surround GMOs. So now that we've covered the 4 most important myths that are promoted by chemical companies, the question is, how do we avoid them? How do we avoid, being in this experiment? And the answer here is not a simple one, but here are some 3 tips that will help you navigate through the supermarket. The first tip makes sense not only because of GMOs, but because it's no good for you. It's to avoid processed foods. So, avoid the Tostitos and the chocolate chip cookies and all that stuff that comes in the box, and just avoid it altogether. Now, if you are going to consume it, if you still require, if you still need to consume some of that, then what I encourage you to look for is the non-GMO project label, which is a third-party independent company that actually verifies that there are no GMOs inside of the product. So you don't know which ones have GMOs, but you at least are starting to know which ones don't have them. So that will help you with when it comes to processed foods. Now, the second tip that I have for you is to purchase organic produce. I know it's more expensive, but would you rather pay for it now and have good health, or pay for it later as a hospital bill and have terrible health? So for the most part, and whenever you can, try to purchase organics. This is not only going to be healthy for you, but it's also going to drive the prices down. And so eventually there might be just a turning point where organics are actually at the same price, or at least similar to GMOs or to conventional produce. So just keep purchasing organics as much as you can and within your budget. I would rather pay for it now and have good health than pay for it later and have terrible health and have a hospital bill. So that's the way I feel about it. And the third tip that I have for you is, if you are into animal protein, then purchase the best quality animal protein. For example, grass-fed beef is far superior and more nutritious than the regular meat that you purchase at the supermarket. The regular meat that you purchase at the supermarket is from cows that have been in a confined animal feeding operation, which is not healthy for them because they don't go out in the sun as much. So they're depleted from vitamin D. They also get fed corn. Most of them get fed GMO corn. That's where most of the GMO corn production goes to. It's to feed those cows in the US. And when they are fed that corn, they become sick. They have to open up their stomachs. There's all kinds of nasty things going on there. They get sick. They have to, they have to treat them with antibiotics. So the cow that you're eating is not very healthy. So the meat is not going to have as much nutrition as grass-fed meat, for instance, where the cow is allowed to be out in the open. It's allowed to purge itself with grass, which is its natural diet. So consider the best possible animal protein. That's all I'm saying. And those are the 3 tips that I have to avoid as much as possible GMOs. So I hope these tips help you navigate through the supermarket and navigate through life. And as usual, please remember to comment, like, and share. And for those of you who want to, take it a step further and participate further, I do have a Patreon page, and I'll include the link for you just in case you want to contribute and become a Patreon. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.